Hi there, it's Tony again, and we're back on the bench. And today we're going to be talking about this Garcia Mitchell 302 saltwater reel here. And I'm basically going to talk you through the steps of the take apart and the maintenance that you should be doing with this reel, and then the reassembly. I've been knocking out a lot of these lately, doing services on a lot of these. I actually just finished the 402 model as well, which is very similar to the 302, but it's the high-speed version of the 302. So it's got more teeth in the gear set, but they both have ball bearings. They're both about the same size, roughly, and they're both great reels. But we'll start getting into the take apart on this, and so you can see what that looks like. So you start with taking your handle off here, and we're going to get that out of the way over here, and then we're going to take this this top screw off here so we can get access to our drag. Now this has an all metal drag washer set. There's no fiber washers involved. It's old school. So this spring wing washer here comes off, and then you have to untwist this cap like so. And I'm just going to lay out all these pieces and parts here. You can pull your spool off at this point. I'm just going to dig each one of these out so you can see what these look like, and you can see the sequence in which they go. But yeah, this reel's been around for a long time. It was introduced in the 50s by Garcia Mitchell, and at the time it was state of the art. And I can remember growing up as a kid seeing these from time to time attached to pretty big poles on the banks and the beaches and whatnot. So every once in a while, at least. So that's your drag stack right there. You can put your spool off to the side. Now we can take our rotor off here, and you need a couple of wrenches to do that. You need a 9mm wrench to take this top cap off here, and you should be able to spin that off like so. And then you got a 14mm nut down here. And like I mentioned earlier, I have been servicing a lot of these reels, including this one. So I'm not going to be doing any of the lube work or anything, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's involved in the lubing and the oiling of the reel. So at this point, you can pull your rotor off. Note, there is a washer here, a metal washer. You don't want to lose that. And we'll just put our rotor here off to the side. And then there's also this plastic cap washer that you should have. I've seen some reels that are missing it, but you should have it. And that piece goes under the rotor. So now we can actually get access to our bearing here at this point, but we're not going to do anything with that yet. We're going to start taking off the plates first, and we're gonna see how this looks inside. So you got 4 flat-bladed screws that you're going to pull out. And I recommend parts trays with this so you don't lose your parts. I like having a couple of small ones like this so I can kind of separate certain pieces that came from certain areas myself. And yeah, these reels are getting more rare. It's definitely harder to find parts. If you're looking for parts for these, you're pretty much going to be looking at eBay for parts reels or used parts or whatever you can dig up. Note that there is this anti-brake lever that attaches here in this corner. A lot of people sometimes get confused with where that goes, but that's where it goes. So you can see the insides here. And we'll just talk briefly just a little bit. Assuming that you were taking this reel apart and it was loaded with a bunch of old grease, you would basically want to take it all apart, put all these parts and pieces into a bin of some kind of a tray, and I hose it all down with WD-40, let it sink in for a while, and then you use toothbrushes and a lot of paper towels and cotton swabs, and just get it all clean. Get all the old grease out. You see that there's no old grease in here. It's just a bunch of blue grease that I freshly packed in there recently. And that's the way it really should look. So, and you don't want to be over greasing, of course, for that matter. Now we're going to take the other side off. I'm going to show you what that looks like, your gear side, and we're going to have a look there. So once again, you got 4 screws, and we're going to pull those out. Note that these are different screws on this side than they are on the other side. That's why I like to keep these trays around for that purpose. But yeah, I'm very happy that I finally have been able to work on some of these reels, some of these older vintage reels. I remember when I first bought this reel, I bought it used, of course, on eBay, and I paid a pretty decent price for it, I think. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I don't think it was overpriced. But the reel was very, very stiff. It was very sluggish. It needed some attention. And I've gone through it more than once now, of course, but it's definitely nice to have it all cleaned up. So that's your gear side, your main gear side, and underneath you've got a dog. And so what I do is I get all these parts and pieces cleaned up. This center wheel pops right out, and then this outer ring inside the teeth here pops right out, and then you can pull your main gear out. You can clean up all these pieces, clean up underneath here, and then I just like to hit a couple of beads of oil at some of these pivot points for the dog and the dog spring there, and then once all these pieces are cleaned back up, you can reset those and pack them with fresh grease. And make sure that you use real grease. Don't use multi-purpose grease or auto grease or any of that stuff. That's not going to help you in the long run with these reels. So this is what the rest of it looks like, essentially. And as you can see, there's not a lot to it. Now, at this point, you're pretty much left with taking out your main axle shaft here. There's a screw down here at the bottom. I'm not going to do it just for the purposes of not dragging out the video for too long, but there's a screw here. You pull that out. Then there are 2 tiny little screws here on each side, and those actually hold down the bearing, and you need to take those out. You don't need to take them completely out, but you need to back them out a little bit so that the bearing can move freely in there. If you were to service the bearing, I recommend that you do. If for some reason you can't pull the bearing out, which I have had happen before, you can actually gain access to it underneath here. And I'll try to zoom in on this and so you can see what this looks like. That's a key that just fell out. I'm going to explain where that goes exactly. But you can actually see the bearings down there. You can see the ball bearings down in there. And basically, you just need to clean it up. You need to clean it up down in that area really, really good. Blast it with some WD-40. And then at that point, you can just get a couple of drops of oil in there if you want. Pack up your pinion gear with some blue grease, and you should be good to go. And of course, make sure that your axle shaft is all cleaned up. But you can remove all these pieces, removing that screw, and then you can slide this down. In theory, you should be able to pull your bearing out. If it's locked up in there, you might just need to use some penetrating oil. But outside of that, that's pretty much it. Now, this key that just fell out, I've lost these before, and you can see how tiny this is, but this key is a centering key for the shaft right here, and it goes in that hole, and that helps you line up your rotor down here. And a lot of the times where I've lost those is when you don't have it lined up, and then you try to turn the rotor and then it falls off. So you just want to make sure that you don't do that because you want your rotor to stay into place. So that's kind of the bulk of it. So we're basically just going to put our key back into place here, and sometimes you got to be patient and you gotta use the help of a pair of needle nose pliers sometimes or something like that, but you need to have it facing vertically up and down like that, and you just kind of press it in gently, and it should be fine. So now at this point we're ready to reinstall our main gear set here, or this whole assembly. So note that there is this slide right here, and that needs to line up with that pin on the center wheel. So what I like to do here is I basically like to look at it from this side, of course, and I like to get that center lined up first. And you just kind of have to be patient with this, and you kind of have to work it around a little bit, but eventually you can get it. You just have to work that in like so, and you have to kind of know where your other pins are, so to speak. I'll try it again here and see what we can make happen. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries, but you can get it. But you got to have those holes lined up because it's part of the way that the reel works. You have to have that oscillating factor happening with these components here. So we're just going to try it again. Try to get these holes lined up. For some reason it's not quite wanting to sink in, but we will get there. All right, that's in now. So we're all set to put our screws back in on this side. I'll put those back in there. But yeah, as you can see, I mean, there's some parts involved, but with a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, anyone can really get into these reels and work on them. The hard part is the parts. If you're missing parts, if you do get into that situation, you pretty much will have to seek out parts reels and used parts and things like that on eBay, because you're not going to call up the company for these parts anymore, that's for sure. So but if you take good care of your reel, it'll take good care of you, and by keeping up good maintenance and good cleaning and all that kind of stuff. And like I mentioned earlier, I use a lot of WD-40 on these kinds of reels, usually a lot of degreaser, just whatever it takes to really clean things up, because you want to get all those old contaminants just out of your hair completely. So now we can put back on our other plate here, and don't forget you've got your anti-brake lever that needs to kind of go into place and line up on this corner hole right here. We'll get those screws back in. Yeah, recently I also serviced a 306 and a 406. I've got a video on those as well, and those are also great reels. The 306 was very popular, a step down in size from the 302, but a step up from the 300s that a lot of us are very familiar with. We'll snug these up. Like so. Okay. So now we're ready to put our rotor back on, and once again you should have this plastic clip, and it's got these two little cutouts here. They're kind of hard to see, but those cutouts need to go over those two screws, which are even harder to see, but there's two screws that go in there in the side that hold the bearing in place, and you need to have that resting over those two screws technically. And then you can put your rotor back into place. And don't forget that key, you have to line up with that key. So I recommend that you turn the rotor upside down and you get a sense of where that line is, because you can't see it from the top. And then you just want to gently put that back into place, let that sink down like so, and put your washer on. And then you got your 14 mil nut, and put that back into place. And when it comes to the rotor and all these springs in here, well, I definitely spray them down with some WD-40 or some deep creep, or anything that's going to penetrate in there. WD-40 is just fine. And let that sink in. But then I also apply some beads of oil in those locations there. And then it doesn't hurt to put a little bead of oil sometimes here on this shaft, or just a little bit of blue grease sometimes, just to help keep that lubricated. And then you got your 9 mil, and turn that a little bit. Don't torque things down, you don't need to do that. It's definitely not necessary. Okay, so that's that much of it all back together again. So now we'll just put our drag kit back in on our spool, and all these washers got to go back in sequence, of course. Keyed washer, metal washer. They're all metal washers on this one. Any of us that are used to working on other reels are used to working with metal washers and fiber washers, and you should be able to sink this back down over your main shaft here. And sometimes these washers kind of get a little turned around in there, but they go eventually once you get them spun up in there. Sometimes you gotta pull a couple of them out just to get them to line up just right. There we are. Put that one back in like that, and then that. And then your spring. Put your top cap back on here. And you want to tighten that down a couple of turns there, so that you got a little bit of that sticking out. And then put your spring back into place here like so. Put this cap back on, and then your screw. And that's pretty much the bulk of it. And like I said, it's very, very similar for the 402. It's actually almost identical. There's a couple of extra little rings that are on top of the bearing. Outside of that, there's not a lot of differences really. So we're just going to roll our handle back on, and there you have it. So that's the Garcia Mitchell 302 saltwater spinning reel, and those are the take apart steps and the reassembly steps for you. So if you're working on one and you need to get into it, then you know what to do. So this is Tony with Back on the Bench. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And we'll see you next time.